Well, investors still a little bit nervous after the markets plunged briefly last week. And joining us now to tell us if we are on the road to the recovery that we're hoping for is Nick Bontis, an award-winning professor from the DeGroote School of Business. Thanks for coming again.
Happy Friday.
Thank you very much. Well, let's talk about briefly, how did we get into this predicament? How did Europe get into this mess?
Well, first of all, it all has to do with debt.
Okay.
Buying too many things and not having the cash to pay for them. And specifically when it comes to Greece, we're talking about the percentage of debt as it relates to GDP, or the value of all goods produced in Greece. And it was 115%. That number is far too large compared to other countries like Russia, 7%, or Hong Kong, 15%. Those are nations that actually can manage their debt so that they don't get into too much trouble. And the other issue in Greece, of course, was that you have about 9 million people. 900,000 of those people were working for the government, were getting paid way too much money, and had unbelievable pensions. So you knew the problem was going to happen. They had to rationalize.
What about Spain and Portugal? We've often heard of them being in a very similar situation. Have we rounded the corner, or is there still a chance that we could fall into a global recession again?
Yeah, well, Greece was the first one. Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy. I mean, those are the other countries that could fall into trouble as well. And what they're trying to do in Spain, of course, is to reduce the salaries of the government workers. Spain has announced that most of them are going to reduce by about 5% salaries, and senior managers in government are going to actually reduce their salaries by 15%. I like that tactic because it shows that everybody's going to try to play their part.
Do you think something like that could happen here? We often praise our civil servants for, you know, they've got these great pension plans as well, but what would happen in this country if someone said to you, or, well, you know, you or me, you've got to drop your salary by 5%?
Well, let's face it, Taz, people would freak out here in Canada. That's why they're freaking out in Greece and every other country. They're having riots, they're causing fires. I think that actually reducing salaries is very, very bad strategy. I think it's demoralizing for the individual because they've been budgeting to their expenses based on a certain amount of income. And when you reduce that, it changes everything, makes it all out of whack. So I think if that were to happen in Canada, I can see people perhaps dealing with freezing salaries, but definitely not being able to deal with reducing salaries.
So are we over the worst of it? We know Greece has secured the money that it needs from Europe and the IMF, but of course we're talking about general strikes next week. Could we spin back into a recession?
I think the worst is over, and the reason is that the $145 billion is now coming, and it's coming in mid-May. So the IMF has promised and the EU has promised their share. The real big problem is now what happens. Of course, you know, this is not going to be just free money, a free grant to the Greek government and all the Greek citizens. They're going to have to be able to manage their finances, take on those austerity measures, and make sure they're committed to changing things around so that $145 billion doesn't go to waste.
And let's not forget, that's just paying off the interest, so they still have a long way to go. All right, well, not much of a different situation in this country. We had new figures that said the average Canadian owed $41,000 as of December. That is an astounding number. How are we so comfortable with debt in this country? How can you explain the mindset? I mean, people seem to just depend on dipping into their overdraft and putting stuff on credit.
And you're right, Taz. It's overdraft, it's line of credit, it's credit cards even. $41,000 is an astounding number, probably on par with the average salary in Canada. So that's absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's because there's a certain mentality of keeping up with the Joneses, you know, peer pressure. My neighbor got a bigger house, I got to get a bigger house. This person got some clothes, I got to get some clothes. This person got a car, I got to get some car. It's a very, very big problem in Canada. I hope we don't have the same issues that they're having in the EU. I think we got to rationalize that $41,000 in debt, and we got to do it quickly.
And it seems to be a generational thing, because you think back to our grandparents who paid cash for everything. Those days are long gone. So you have some tips now for anyone who's sinking in debt, how they can get out of it. What's the first thing you recommend to them?
The first step is you got to get out of high interest debt. What that means is you got to look around. Credit cards are bad news. Affinity cards are bad news. Look at your credit card statement. Find out exactly what the interest rate. In some cases, it's 24, 25, 26%. It's far, far too expensive. The second step is start buying things with cash. It's very difficult to buy that extra Louis Vuitton purse or that extra Golf titanium driver when all you have to do is plunk down a credit card. When you got to dip into your pocket and actually pay cash for those expensive items, that becomes a little bit more difficult. Third thing, go meet with your creditor or your banker. This is very, very important. You might have an opportunity to rationalize or consolidate some of your debt. Perhaps you might be having the opportunity to negotiate a lower interest rate, perhaps for a line of credit instead of all those other credit cards. And the final and most important step, budget, budget, budget. I meet so many people and I ask them very, very simple questions. Do you measure the money coming in and compare it to the money coming out? And almost everybody tells me, no, don't have time to do that. Well, come on, it's not that difficult. You pretty much know if you're a salary-based employee how much money's coming in every month, and you can't spend more than that.
I think it's just the reality. No one likes to know balance that checkbook.
Right.
All right, well, for anyone who has some money sitting around, what do you do with it now? What's the best way to make your money work for you? Because last week, market plunge really scared a lot of people off. No one wants to talk about bonds. Where would you recommend people put their money?
Well, just full disclosure, Taz, I own a mutual fund company, so what we tell our clients is make sure you go into blue chip, dividend earning stocks. And the biggest recommendation that I can make is banks, especially Canadian banks.
Really?
You can purchase mutual funds of financial services or just purchase the bank shares themselves. Throughout this whole financial crisis that we've had in the U.S. and all over the world, do you know that our Canadian banks probably had the best performance because of our regulated markets? So I really, really trust our banks, and I encourage all investors, if they don't have investments in our Canadian banks, pick one or two of those and put them in your portfolio.
Good advice. Now, speaking of investment, we're talking about building a stadium for the PanAm Games. We can't seem to agree on a location. What are the important factors to consider?
The most important factor for me, I take from the Vancouver Winter Olympics. What did I learn about those Olympics? I learned that the city is on display for the whole world to see. Do you remember those scenes in downtown Vancouver when everybody was celebrating and everybody was together socializing? That is critical in our stadium. I want it to be in a location, and I'm not going to fight as to which one is the correct way. What I want is to make sure that everybody goes and socializes there. And it's not just about our professional football team or even a professional soccer team. Whatever stadium we pick has to be fully utilized. That's the secret. So beyond the pro teams, local teams, amateur teams, even high school teams, I want to make sure that if we're going to invest in a stadium, it becomes a physical symbol of this city, but most importantly, we get full capacity utilization of it.
And in fact, there will be a discussion over that beginning on Monday. You're chairing that, I believe, the Hamilton Economic Summit. I want to ask you a quick couple of questions. Richard Branson's underwater plane, is it just for the rich people to throw away their money, or you think it has any practical implications?
Joke, Taz. What a joke.
It's a joke?
It's a plane underwater and you spend $25,000 to rent it. Please.
Okay. What about the BlackBerry? Apparently, they're talking about building the BlackPad or making the BlackPad. Do you think it can compete with the iPad, or are they too late on the market?
Yeah, too late on the market. I don't agree with this one either. Rim, if you're considering really launching this BlackPad, I mean, you're way too late in the market. Why don't you just concentrate on your own smartphones and keep on pushing market share there?
All right. Well, we appreciate your time. As always, that does it for Bontis on Business this week. Be sure to check out his website, nickbontis.com. Thanks as well. Always a pleasure, Nick.